There was an old saying among the starborn, those of us who'd lived our entire lives under the Empire's steel canopy. A man who stares too long at the stars sees only his own darkness reflected back. I thought of that as I stood in the observation deck of the ISS Titan, watching the distant pinpricks of light shift against the void. Beyond the armored viewport lay the rogue black sun, a point of utter negation that swallowed the stars around it, an unholy puncture wound in the galaxy's fabric. The communique from Imperialis Ceruleus still echoed in my mind, a voice both imperious and cold. Admiral Kane, you are tasked with leading the Oblivion Vanguard to investigate the anomaly at coordinates Delta 94X. Containment or neutralization at your discretion. Failure is not an option. Failure. The Empire's favorite word. I turned from the viewport, letting the magnetic boots of my uniform click against the deck. Below me, the bridge crew buzzed with quiet efficiency. Commander Steele stood at the central console, his sharp features illuminated by the blue glow of tactical readouts. He didn't notice my approach until I spoke, my voice measured and calm. Status? Steele stiffened, the reflexive posture of someone raised in the shadow of authority. Fleet is at 90% readiness, Admiral. Final warp synchronization checks underway. We're clear to engage the jump gate within the hour. I nodded and leaned over the console, skimming the data feeds. 12 ships, each bristling with the Empire's finest technology, from gravitic warheads to quantum-linked drones. A fraction of the Imperial Navy's might, and yet a lethal fraction. And it was mine to command. Concerns? I asked. Steele hesitated. He rarely spoke without weighing his words. The anomaly. The reports suggest it's unlike anything we've encountered before. Gravitational inconsistencies, unstable energy emissions. There's no precedent for this kind of phenomenon. I glanced at him. You're worried. Cautious, he corrected. The crew's been whispering. Rumors about what this black sun might be. The crew whispers because they have time to, I said, straightening. Once we're en route, they'll be too busy following orders to indulge in idle speculation. Steele's lips twitched, a faint, fleeting smile. Of course, Admiral. In truth, his caution mirrored my own, though I'd never admit it aloud. The Empire's scholars, those few who still dared to call themselves that, had sent us fragments of their findings. The rogue black sun broke all known laws of physics, its gravitational field oscillating as if it were both present and absent. Probes had been sent ahead. None returned. The hour passed quickly, and soon the fleet was aligned with the warp gate, a monumental ring of dark steel suspended in the void. As the Titan took its position at the vanguard, I felt the hum of the ship's quantum drive spooling to life. The bridge lights dimmed, replaced by the glow of the gate's activation. Threads of energy coiled within the ring, forming a shimmering aperture that yawned open like the maw of some cosmic predator. All ships, prepare for transition, Steele ordered, his voice calm and firm. I felt the familiar lurch as the Titan entered the gate, space bending and collapsing around us. At first there was only silence, the oppressive kind that feels like it could crush the breath from your lungs. Then the stars snapped back into view, but they weren't the stars we'd left behind. These were distant, dim, their light pale. And there, at the heart of it all, was the black sun. It was impossible to look at directly. Not because it burned too bright, but because it seemed to consume the very concept of light. My gaze slipped and faltered as if my brain refused to comprehend its presence. Around it, space twisted and warped, a visual explosion of distortion. Gravitational anomalies detected, reported Lieutenant Jared Sinclair, the fleet's chief navigator. His voice carried a frenetic edge, like a man glimpsing the edge of a precipice. It's unstable, pulling and releasing simultaneously. This doesn't make sense. Maintain distance, I ordered. Keep all ships at minimum safe range. Safe range might be theoretical, sir, Sinclair muttered, but he complied. As we closed the distance, the anomaly's effects became more pronounced. Instrumentation flickered, displaying contradictory data. Temporal anomalies began to register, a subtle but unmistakable distortion in the passage of time. Seconds stretched and contracted, leaving a faint disorientation that crept through the crew. Steele turned to me, his expression carefully neutral. "Shall we deploy probes, Admiral?" "No point. If the Empire's probes didn't return, neither will ours. We proceed cautiously. Titan formation." The fleet adjusted, drawing closer in a protective array. But even as the ships maneuvered, the anomaly convulsed. A sudden, violent surge of gravity that yanked the Titan and its companions towards the black sun. The ship's artificial gravity system screamed in protest, and I grabbed the edge of the console to steady myself. "Emergency thrusters, full burn," Steele ordered. The ship shuddered as engines roared to life, fighting against the pull. Through the viewport, I saw the other ships in the fleet struggling as well, their forms dwarfed by the presence of the anomaly. "We're being pulled into dark space," Sinclair said, his face pale. "The gravitational field, it's creating a dimensional breach." "Brace for impact," I ordered, my voice cutting through the chaos. The world shattered. That's the only way I can describe it. One moment, the Titan was a solid, tangible thing, a fortress of steel and discipline. The next, reality itself unraveled. The stars outside twisted and blurred, their light bending. The ship groaned, its structure protesting the strain of crossing into a realm it was never meant to enter. When I opened my eyes, the bridge was still intact, though the lights flickered weakly. Around me, the crew looked shaken, but uninjured. "Report," I said, my voice rough. Steele hesitated before answering. "We've transitioned, Admiral, into what appears to be dark space." Sinclair was already at his console, working the controls. "We're not in real space anymore. This is something else." I stepped toward the viewport and my breath caught. Outside, the void was no longer empty. Instead, it was filled with a lattice of dark matter and organic components, a sprawling construct that stretched beyond the limits of sight. "What is that?" Steele whispered, his composure slipping for the first time. "I don't know," I said, and I hated the sound of those words. The lattice looked alive, its surfaces shifting and rippling as if breathing. Strands of dark matter extended from its core, weaving through the void like veins through flesh. It was both beautiful and grotesque, a monument to something ancient and unknowable. "Admiral," said a voice behind me. I turned to see Dr. Oliver Bell, the fleet's chief engineer. He looked pale, his normally steady hands shaking slightly. "I've never seen anything like this. The structure, it's emitting dark matter at a rate that defies known physics, and these readings..." He hesitated, as if unsure how to continue. "It's responsive. It's reacting to our presence. I don't know how or why, but this isn't just a structure. It's something more." I stared at the lattice, a cold weight settling in my chest. This was no ordinary anomaly. This was a trap, a lure that had ensnared us in its web. And somewhere, in the depths of that vast construct, I felt something watching. The communique from the Empire echoed in my mind once more. "Containment or neutralization at your discretion. The Empire had sent us into the abyss. Now it was up to me to find a way out." I stood on the bridge, staring out at the lattice. No matter how long I looked, I couldn't trace its edges. It wasn't just vast, it seemed infinite, a thing that refused to obey dimensions. Veins of dark matter throbbed rhythmically, glowing faintly with an eerie, greenish light that bled into the void. "Admiral," Steele said from his station, his voice calm but strained. "Major Walters and the away team are ready for deployment." I nodded, turning to face the comms officer. "Patch me through." The static cleared, and Walters' voice came through the speakers. "This is Major Walters. Boarding party assembled and standing by. We'll maintain open comms and feed telemetry back to the Titan. Any final instructions, Admiral?" "Maintain discipline, Major, no heroics. If you encounter anything hostile, fall back immediately. We're not here to be martyrs." "Understood, sir. Launching now." I watched as the away team's shuttle detached from the Titan and began its cautious descent toward the lattice. Its thrusters flickered as it maneuvered through the dark matter strands, which writhed as if sensing the intrusion. For a moment, I felt a pang of doubt. Sending a team into that thing felt like throwing stones into a black hole, but we had no choice. The lattice wasn't just an anomaly, it was a mystery we couldn't afford to leave unanswered. Time stretched as we waited for the shuttle to dock. The comms line was silent except for the hiss of background interference. On the bridge, the tension was undeniable. Even Sinclair, who usually muttered to himself about equations or dark space phenomena, sat unnervingly still. Then, Walter's voice came through. "We've docked. Airlock secure. Proceeding inside." I leaned closer to the console, eyes fixed on the telemetry feed flickering across the main screen. The helmet cams revealed the interior of the lattice, a labyrinthine structure. The walls were an unsettling fusion of sleek metallic surfaces, interwoven with organic textures that writhed like the ripple of wind across water. "Reading stable atmosphere," said Walters. His tone was calm, professional, but I could hear the edge of unease beneath it. "Composition's breathable, but we're keeping helmets sealed." "Major!" Dr. Bell's voice cut in, sharp with urgency. "Do you see any kind of control mechanisms, interfaces, anything that could provide insight into the structure's purpose?" "Negative, Doctor," Walters replied. "The walls are covered in these symbols. They're shifting too quickly for me to make sense of them." Suddenly, one of the Marines, an older man named Stone, spoke up. "I think I saw something move." "Stay sharp," Walters ordered. "No unnecessary noise. Keep formation." The feed flickered again, and I thought I saw something in the corner of the screen, a shadow that didn't belong, a faint ripple in the air. Then it was gone. The team moved further into the structure, their actions calculated. Minutes dragged by. Then, out of nowhere, Stone's voice broke the silence. "There's something here." "Hold position," Walters commanded. His helmet cam panned toward the source of Stone's alarm. At first there was nothing but the shifting walls. Then slowly, something emerged. A figure made of black, glistening matter, its shape constantly shifting. It had no face, only a void where one should have been. The Marines opened fire, their weapons unleashing bursts of energy that illuminated the corridor in harsh flashes. The figure didn't flinch. Instead, it seemed to absorb the energy, its form rippling and growing. "Fall back," Walters ordered, his voice tight with urgency. The team retreated, their helmet cams swinging wildly as they moved. The figure didn't pursue, but its presence lingered like a stain on the feed. When the shuttle finally returned to the Titan, I was in the hangar to meet them. Walters and his team disembarked in silence. Even through their visors, I could see the strain in their eyes. "What happened?" I asked. Walters removed his helmet, revealing a face pale with shock. "That thing, it wasn't just a construct, it was alive, and it knew we were there." I turned to Bell, who was scanning the team with a handheld device. "Any contamination?" Bell shook his head. "No immediate signs, but I'll run more tests." Sinclair's voice came through the comms. "Admiral, you need to see this." Back on the bridge, Sinclair pointed to the main screen, where the telemetry from the lattice was still displayed. The symbols on the walls had changed. They were no longer random patterns. They were words in the Empire's tongue. "Release me," Sinclair read aloud, his voice trembling. The bridge fell silent. Was it possible the lattice was responding to our presence? Or was this some kind of trap designed to exploit our curiosity? As I struggled to make sense of it, a series of whispers, too fragmented to understand, filled the air. I looked around the bridge, but none of the crew seemed to notice. "Admiral," Steele said, breaking the silence, "what are your orders?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the whispers became louder, drowning out my thoughts. They weren't just sounds. They were emotions, images. A sprawling city of spires crumbling into ash. A featureless void swallowing the stars. A voice that wasn't a voice, promising power beyond comprehension. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to focus. "Maintain formation. No one goes near that lattice without my direct approval." Steele nodded, but I could see the doubt in his eyes. He wasn't the only one. The whispers hadn't reached the rest of the crew yet, but the tension was undeniable. Everyone felt it. The weight of the lattice. The sense that we were trespassing in a place we were never meant to be. Over the next hours, the situation deteriorated. The whispers spread. Crew members reported hearing voices calling their names. Others claimed to see shadows moving in their peripheral vision. Paranoia took root and tempers flared. Fights broke out over minor disputes, and discipline began to fray. Steele and I worked to maintain order, but the cracks in the fleet's unity were growing. It didn't help that factions were already forming. Some of the crew, led by Major Walters, began to view the lattice as a divine construct. They called themselves the Faithful, convinced that the whispers were the voice of a god offering salvation. "We're being tested," Walters said during one of our confrontations. His eyes burned with zeal. "The lattice is a gift, Admiral, a chance to ascend beyond the Empire's petty confines." "And what about the thing you saw inside it?" I countered. "The thing that didn't flinch when you opened fire?" Walters smiled, a chilling expression devoid of doubt. "It wasn't hostile, it was a guardian, protecting something greater than itself." Not everyone agreed with Walters. A group of officers led by Steele and supported by Bell called themselves the Rationalists. They argued that the lattice was a threat, a cosmic weapon that needed to be contained or destroyed. Their debates with the faithful became increasingly heated, and I found myself caught in the middle, trying to hold the fleet together. I stood alone on the observation deck, staring out at the lattice. The whispers had become a constant background noise that ebbed and flowed like a tide. I closed my eyes, trying to block them out, but they only became clearer.
"Admiral Kane,"
the voice said. It wasn't a whisper anymore. It was speaking directly to me.
"You've seen the Empire's rot, its decay. Let me show you what lies beyond."
Images flooded my mind. The galaxy, not as it was, but as it could be, a place of unity, of unbridled power. And at the center of it all, me. Not a servant of the Empire, but a ruler, a god. I opened my eyes, struggling to breathe. I felt truly afraid, not of death, but of what I might become if I listened. The whispers were no longer just noise. They were a choice. And the longer we stayed here, the harder it would be to resist. I dreamed of fire. Not the roaring inferno of destruction, but a slow, creeping fire that smoldered and consumed in silence. In my dream, it spread across the galaxy, devouring stars and spilling into the void, leaving only darkness. I stood at the edge of it, holding the match that had ignited it all. I woke with a start, the echoes of the whispers still threading through my thoughts. For a brief, terrifying moment, I couldn't tell if I was awake or still caught in the dream. I wiped a hand across my face, only to find it shaking. The whispers had burrowed deeper into my mind, no longer content with vague promises and fleeting glimpses of power. They spoke now with clarity, offering visions of what could be, if only I would listen. The comm chime broke the silence, its sharp tone cutting through the fog in my head. I reached for the console. "This is Kane." Steele's voice came through, tight and clipped. "Admiral, there's been another incident. Deck 7, 2 crewmen dead." My stomach sank, but I forced my voice to remain steady. "Cause?" "Unofficially, a fight, but the survivors claim it wasn't human." I closed my eyes, the weight of it pressing down on me. Another fracture in the fleet, another splinter in our unity. "I'll be there shortly. Keep it contained." As the comms disconnected, I dressed quickly, pulling on the crisp uniform that felt heavier with each passing day. The corridors of the Titan were quieter now, the usual chatter and movement replaced by an uneasy stillness. Crew members passed me with wary glances, their eyes darting toward the shadows. Deck 7 was a mess. Blood smeared the walls, and the bodies of 2 crewmen lay crumpled on the floor, their faces twisted in terror. Steele stood nearby, flanked by 2 Marines. "They said it started as an argument," he explained as I approached. "But then, something else happened. They described a figure, black, shifting, like the thing Walter's team encountered in the lattice. "Are they still coherent?" I asked, glancing at the survivors. 2 engineers huddled in the corner, their faces pale and drawn. "Barely," Steele said. "They're claiming the figure came out of the walls, attacked without warning." I crouched beside one of the engineers, a young man barely out of the academy. His eyes were wide with fear, and he flinched as I spoke. "What did you see?" I asked, keeping my tone as calm as I could. His voice trembled. It wasn't human, it didn't have a face, it just appeared, and when it touched them, they—" He broke off, shaking his head violently. "I swear, Admiral, it wasn't real. It couldn't have been real." But it was real. The lattice was bleeding its horrors into the ship, warping our reality with every passing hour. I straightened, my jaw tightening. "Seal the area," I ordered Steele. "Double the patrols, and no one goes anywhere alone." "Yes, sir," Steele replied. I had spent my life navigating the Empire's rigid hierarchies, its unyielding systems of order. But here, in the shadow of the lattice, none of that mattered. We were ants crawling across the surface of a god's prison, and the god was stirring. Back on the bridge, Sinclair was waiting for me. He clutched a datapad covered in scrawled equations. "It's accelerating," he said, his voice a frantic whisper. "The lattice is a containment field, Admiral. A prison, and whatever's inside, it's trying to get out." My chest tightened, though I kept my expression neutral. "What makes you say that?" Sinclair jabbed at the datapad. "The symbols on the walls, they're a form of quantum encryption. I've been running simulations trying to decode them. They're not just messages, they're a failsafe, a warning system. And it's failing, breaking down." "Breaking down?" I repeated. "Why?" He hesitated, his gaze darting toward the viewport where the lattice loomed like a cancerous growth. "Because we're here. Our presence is interfering with the field, destabilizing it. Every moment we remain in orbit, we're making it worse." I stared at him, the implications sinking in. The lattice hadn't called us here as an opportunity. It had drawn us in as a catalyst, using us to weaken its bonds. And whatever was trapped inside wasn't going to wait much longer. "Have you identified the entity?" I asked. Sinclair hesitated before nodding. "Catalyth," he said, the word foreign and heavy on his tongue. "A quantum being, not bound by our concept of time or space. It exists across probabilities, collapsing them into outcomes it desires." I frowned. "And what does it desire?" "To escape," he said simply. "And once it does, it won't stop with us." The words hung in the air like a guillotine. I turned to the viewport, my mind racing. The whispers, the shadows, the fractures in reality. They were all symptoms of Catalyth's presence. And we had brought it closer to freedom with every step we took. "Admiral!" A voice called from the comms console, breaking my thoughts. It was Walter's, his tone urgent. "We've got movement near the lattice, multiple contacts, they're heading for the fleet." I strode to the console, my heart pounding. The main screen flickered to life, showing the fleet's formation around the lattice. Dark shapes were emerging from the construct, their forms shifting and fluid. They moved with astonishing speed, closing the distance between them and the ships in seconds. The bridge erupted into motion as alarms blared. On the screen, the shapes reached the outermost ships, their surfaces rippling like liquid. Energy weapons fired, but the shapes absorbed the blasts without slowing. One of the smaller ships, the ISS Vindicator, was the first to fall, its hull crumpling as the shapes swarmed it. The Titan shuddered as its weapons came to life, hurling energy bolts at the shapes. One of the entities dissolved under the assault, its form collapsing into a burst of dark matter. But the others continued, their movements almost sentient, as if they were adapting to our attacks. One by one, the smaller ships were overwhelmed, their defenses torn apart by the lattice's spawn. "Steele, get me Bell," I said. Bell's voice emerged from the comms. "Admiral, I'm in engineering. What the hell is going on out there?" "We're under attack," I said bluntly. "These entities, are they connected to the lattice?" "Absolutely," he replied. They're manifestations of its defense systems. It's trying to protect itself. Then how do we stop them? I asked. There was a pause, and when Bell spoke again, his voice was grim. You don't. Not with brute force. The lattice is the source. Unless we find a way to shut it down, these things will keep coming. I closed my eyes, the weight of it settling over me. The lattice wasn't just a prison, it was a weapon, and it had turned its fury on us. And somewhere in its depths, Catalith was waiting, biding its time. I turned to Steele. Pull the fleet back. We need to regroup. Steele nodded, relaying the order. The ships that remained began to retreat, their engines flaring as they broke formation. The shapes pursued, but their numbers were thinning, our weapons finally making a dent in their ranks. As the battle raged, the whispers returned, stronger than ever. They were no longer subtle or fragmented. They were a chorus that filled my mind with clarity.
Admiral Kane,
they said, resonating with a terrible power.
Do you see now? The Empire is a hollow shell, a corpse masquerading as a god. I can give you what it never could. I can give you purpose.
I clenched my fists, fighting against the pull of the whispers, but their promises were seductive, their visions intoxicating. A galaxy remade, a throne carved from the bones of stars, and at the center of it all me. Catalith's voice was no longer distant. It was inside me, offering me the one thing I had always craved but never admitted. Control. Control over the chaos. Control over the void. Control over my destiny. And I wasn't sure if I could resist. The Titan was dying, but so was the lattice. Both groaned under the strain of their own existence, their structures buckling as if they couldn't bear the weight of what they had become. I stood on the bridge, hands gripping the railing as the remnants of my fleet spiraled around us, firing at the swarms of constructs emerging from the lattice. The viewport was a kaleidoscope of chaos, ships tearing apart, dark matter strands lashing out, and the lattice itself flickering between solidity and something less tangible, less real. I could feel Catalith, not just as a presence but as a weight, a force dragging me toward an abyss I could not see but knew was there. "Admiral," Steele's voice broke through the static and noise. "The eternal flame is gone. Constructs overwhelmed it. We're down to 5 ships." "4," Sinclair corrected from his station, his voice eerily calm. "The Sentinel just breached containment. Its reactor went critical." I didn't look at either of them. My eyes were fixed on the lattice. The core was exposed now, a swirling vortex of energy. This was our chance, and it was slipping away. "Status on the quantum drive overload?" I asked. Bell's voice came through the comms from engineering. "It's almost ready, Admiral. 2 minutes, maybe less. But once I engage it, there's no reversing it. There was never going to be," I said softly. Steele moved closer. "Admiral, there's still time to reconsider. If we fall back now..." "We're not falling back," I cut him off. I turned to face him, seeing the weariness etched into his features, the same weariness I felt in my own bones. "This is the only way. You know that." Steele held my gaze for a moment, then nodded, his jaw tightening. "I'll make sure the fleet holds the line." He turned away, and for a fleeting second I wanted to call him back, to apologize, to say something that would make this easier. But there were no words for what we were about to do. No solace in the face of annihilation. The constructs pressed closer, their numbers seemingly infinite. On the screen I watched as the Iron Vow, a battered frigate that had been with us from the start, was engulfed. Its weapons fell silent, its hull crumpling like paper before it vanished into the lattice's maw. The crew had fought to the last moment, and their sacrifice bought us precious seconds. "Admiral," Sinclair said, his voice trembling, "the lattice, it's reacting, the core's destabilizing." I stepped closer to the viewport. Catalith was waking, and it knew what we were trying to do. "Bell," I said into the comms, "engage the drive." There was a pause, and then Bell's voice came through, steady and resolute. "Understood, Admiral. Overload initiated." The Titan shuddered, as the quantum drive began to destabilize, its energy bleeding into the lattice. The whispers surged, a single voice that filled the bridge and my mind.
Mitchell Kane,
Catalith said, its voice smooth and insidious.
you still have a choice. You don't have to die here. I can show you what lies beyond this fleeting existence. I can give you eternity.
I closed my eyes, the images flooding my mind unbidden. A galaxy united under my command, the Empire's corruption burned away, the stars bending to my will. I saw myself standing at the center of it all, a figure of absolute power, a god among mortals. But beneath the visions, beneath the promises, I felt the truth. Catalith wasn't offering salvation, it was offering oblivion wrapped in gilded lies. "I've seen enough of eternity," I said aloud. "And it's not worth the cost." The bridge shook violently, consoles sparking as the lattice's constructs began to tear into the Titan. Steele's voice came through the chaos, calm and commanding. "Shields are failing. Hull integrity at 20%. "We're out of time," I said, gripping the railing. "All remaining ships, focus fire on the lattice. Give Bell the time he needs." Through the viewport, I watched as the surviving ships rallied, their weapons blazing as they poured everything they had into the lattice. The construct swarmed them, but they held, their sacrifice buying us the final moments we needed. The core of the lattice began to collapse, its light consuming itself. The whispers turned to screams, a sound that resonated through the ship, through my very mind. Catalith's presence was overwhelming now, a force of pure rage and desperation. The Titan groaned, its structure failing as the quantum drive reached critical mass. The light of the lattice's core filled the viewport, a blinding brilliance that consumed everything. I felt the heat, the pressure, the pull of the void, and then silence. No sound, no light, no thought. Just the faint echo of Catalith's voice fading into the abyss. And then I was standing on the edge of a vast expanse, a place that wasn't a place. The stars were gone, replaced by a void that stretched infinitely in all directions. I felt weightless, unmoored, my consciousness adrift. A single thought flickered in the darkness. Was it enough? Will they remember? The void didn't answer, and I knew it never would. I wasn't a hero. I wasn't a savior. I was a man who made a choice, who gave everything to hold back the tide for just a little longer. Whether that choice would matter in the end, I would never know. As the last vestiges of my being faded into the void, I felt a sense of peace. Not triumph, not glory, but the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, for one brief moment, I had stood against the abyss. And that was enough. The lattice was gone, its remnants scattered across the void. The rogue black sun, its tether to Catalith severed, collapsed in on itself, vanishing into the darkness. The Empire would send scouts, probes, and eventually fleets to investigate. But they would find nothing, just the faint echoes of a battle fought and won at an unthinkable cost. Admiral Mitchell Kane's name would never be recorded in the annals of history. His choice, his sacrifice, would remain a secret known only to the silence of the void. But in the fragile peace that followed, in the absence of the whispers, his legacy endured, unspoken but eternal.